Hi, this talk is on Karl Marx. And Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto. So he is associated with communism. And so you might come into this talk having some preconceived notions about Marx. And that's fine. But I do want to give you a correct understanding of his philosophy. And so I need to distinguish the communism that Marx talked about and the communism that has actually emerged in the world. Okay, and so the communism that has emerged in the world with the Soviet Union and with Cuba and so on, we can think of as a crude kind of communism. And the reason for that is that the people in those societies, they are not emancipated. They are not free. If anything, they might be more constrained than in capitalist societies. They do have one sort of role to play in society, and they're expected to play it for X number of hours a day, and then go home and eat their food and so on. And the governments, these communist governments, are still trying to maximize production, extract as much oil as they can, because that's where their wealth comes from, and specialize and be the most efficient producers as they can be for certain items and things like that. So the communism that Marx is talking about, he didn't really talk about what a communist society would look like. And that's because he couldn't. He was talking from a time when this communism had not emerged in the world. So he didn't know exactly what it would look like. But what his philosophy is essentially about is the emancipation of the individual. He thought that capitalism alienated people. And we could think of alienation as a feeling of not quite being at home. And we will look at the various forms of alienation this week, and we'll look at Karl Marx's arguments. But communism to him was people in a society no longer feeling alienated. Okay, so I just want to have you keep that in mind. Marx was not an architect of Stalinist Russia that killed millions of people and was an absolute, disgrace. So let's start by thinking about Karl Marx's concept of the person. And we could start by noting that unlike John Locke, he has no thought that people are sort of a blank slate, coming into the world. So what he thinks that there's a human nature, okay, and part of that human nature are fixed drives, and those would be drives that are in every person, in every time and place in history. They're fixed in our nature. Now they might, and we, hunger, thirst, sex drive, and so on would all be considered fixed drives. Now, depending on what time and place you are in history, they will change their form, which I have noted here. So for instance, if you're living in Victorian England, you're going to suppress your sex drive. It's not going to be out in the open. It's not going to be talked about. But if you're in, the 2000s in the United States, it isn't suppressed in that way. It is talked about. But the sex drive is constant in either society, but society does influence the kind of form, the way that it's talked about, and the way it's thought about. Okay. Then we get to relative appetites, which owe their origin to social structures and economic relations between people. So these are appetites that people have, things that people pursue, that they are specific to the sort of economic relations that you find yourself in. So in capitalism, the primary, the preeminent relative appetite is money. You have to make money and spend money. And you can't simply say, well, it's just relative to capitalism, and so it's sort of imaginary. Well, yes, in some sense, but because of the economic relations that we found ourselves in, it is a real need. You can't simply just sort of shift your mind about it and be over it. you need money. Here's a quote from John Berger, an art critic and historian. He says, "Money is life, not in the sense that without money you starve, not in the sense that capital gives one class power over the entire lives of another class, but in the sense that money is the token of and the key to every human capacity. The power to spend money is the power to live. According to the legends of publicity, those who lack the power to spend money become literally faceless. Those who have the power become lovable." Okay? So people are, what we should really get from this is that when you are born, you're born into a society, and that society shapes it, you know, the kind of needs that you have, and hence the kind of person that you are. So capitalism is integral to our very being and who we are, because it produces real needs that have to be met. Okay, so people are a product of history. I am a product of a long-standing history that has found itself to be where it's at right now. So people are a product of their history, but at the same time, people make history. So we create the conditions. People create the conditions that then uh, shape us as people. So we sort of create our own constraints, you might think about.